All right. I need you to take a breath with me for a second because the Gus Lamont case just took the turn a lot of us felt coming from day one. And yes, I'm going to say it. This case was fishy from the beginning, and now we're watching the official investigation catch up to what people's instincts were screaming months ago. This week, on February 5th, South Australia Police formally declared Gus's disappearance a major crime. Detective Superintendent Darren Fielke stood up and told the public that Task Force Horizon is now focusing their investigation on persons known to Gus as possibly being involved in his disappearance and suspected death. Not strangers, not the environment, people who knew him, people who were there. Now, before we go any further, let me be absolutely clear about what we're doing here. We are not playing courtroom on YouTube. We're going to stick to what police have confirmed and what the evidence is showing us. Because the fastest way to wreck a real investigation is to turn it into a rumor farm where everyone's just throwing names around. But what we can do, what we should do, is talk about the patterns, the questions, and why so many people looked at this case from September and thought something doesn't add up here. And if you're new to this channel, follow and subscribe, because this is one of the few places where you can share your honest opinion even when it doesn't match the mainstream media's narrative. We do responsible analysis, but we're not afraid to ask the uncomfortable questions that need asking. Gus Lamont is a 4-year-old boy who disappeared from Oak Park Station, a remote pastoral property in outback South Australia near Yunta, on September 27th, 2025. From the very beginning, the public narrative leaned heavily on that classic outback fear. A little kid wandered off, got lost, and the brutal Australian landscape swallowed him up. And look, that's not an unreasonable starting theory in remote Australia. We all know how unforgiving the distances are, how fast the heat can kill, how easy it is to lose your bearings when everything looks the same for kilometres in every direction. But here's the thing that made people's alarms go off early. The thing that made this case feel fishy from the beginning. The complete and total lack of physical trace. Not, we didn't find much. Not, the evidence is minimal. We're talking about basically nothing. No footprints leading anywhere meaningful. No clothing snagged on bushes. No signs of a little boy moving through scrub. No trail that made sense. And when you've got a massive search operation with hundreds of people, drones, thermal imaging, and you still can't point to a single piece of evidence that shows a child walked into that environment, your brain starts asking different questions. Detective Superintendent Fielke confirmed exactly this when he said, and I'm quoting directly here, "Despite these extraordinary efforts, all of the combined searches have found no evidence, physical or otherwise, to suggest Gus has wandered off." That's not police being cautious. That's police telling you they exhausted that theory and it didn't hold up. Now let's talk about what those extraordinary efforts looked like, because this is important context for understanding why the "he just wandered off" story doesn't work. SAPAEL conducted what they're calling the largest and most intensive missing person search in South Australian police history. We're talking about 163 SAPOL members and 230 additional resources including SES, the Australian Defence Force, an Indigenous tracker, and community volunteers. These people were deployed at Oak Park Station for over 20 days. They conducted 8 separate ground searches that extended out to a radius of 5.47 kilometres from the homestead, covering 95 square kilometres of terrain. They searched 3 dams twice, and I mean searched them properly, including draining them. They went down 6 mine shafts within a 10-kilometre radius of the homestead. The aerial searching was just as intense. Polair did initial passes using infrared FLIR technology out to 12 kilometres from the homestead. Drones captured imagery of a 2.5 kilometre radius around the homestead, a 2 kilometre radius around the dams, and along known travel routes stretching 8 and 6 kilometres out. Then they brought in aircraft fitted with highly specialised camera equipment and did 2 separate passes, first out to 10 kilometres, then out to 15 kilometres from the homestead. The total aerial coverage was 706 square kilometres. And here's the kicker. All of that imagery was processed using specifically designed, specialised AI software programs and reviewed by Task Force Horizon investigators. On February 2nd, just days before this major crime declaration, Task Force Horizon officers searched several locations around Oak Park Station, specifically looking for Gus's remains. Not looking for a lost child, looking for remains. That tells you where their thinking was already heading. So when police stand up and say they found no evidence of wandering after all of that, after AI-assisted processing of hundreds of square kilometres of thermal and visual imagery, after draining dams and searching mine shafts and having an Indigenous tracker on the ground, you have to understand what that absence means. The environment is honest. Scrub and dirt and dams don't lie. A 4-year-old moving through that landscape leaves signs. The fact that none of those signs exist after this level of searching isn't just unusual, it's the evidence itself. Here's something most people don't realise because the media didn't emphasise it early enough. While that massive search operation was happening, while volunteers were walking grids and drones were flying patterns, Task Force Horizon was simultaneously running 2 other complete investigations in the background. One was investigating whether Gus was abducted from Oak Park Station by an unknown person. The other was investigating whether someone known to him was involved in his disappearance and suspected death. Think about what that tells you. From very early on, police weren't just hoping to find a lost child. They were actively investigating criminal scenarios, and now Detective Superintendent Fielke has confirmed that Task Force Horizon investigators found no evidence to suggest Gus was abducted by an unknown person. None. So that theory's gone. The wandering theory is gone. And what's left is the investigation into people who knew Gus, people who had access to Oak Park Station, people who were in that immediate orbit when he disappeared. When you eliminate the comfortable explanations, what remains gets uncomfortable fast. No evidence of environmental wandering, no evidence of stranger abduction. That leaves you with a very tight circle of possibility, and that circle is centred on the station itself and the people connected to it. On January 14th and 15th of this year, detectives executed a search warrant at Oak Park Station. They did a comprehensive forensic search of the homestead and they seized items. Specifically, they took a vehicle, a motorcycle, and electronic devices for forensic examination. Detective Superintendent Fielke also said he anticipates there will be further searches at Oak Park Station and at several sites in an adjacent national park as new information and intelligence comes to hand. Now let's think about what those seizures mean. Because police don't just grab random stuff. A vehicle matters because vehicles extend range and capability. Someone can move something, hide something, dispose of something far beyond what they could do on foot. A motorcycle is even more interesting because a motorcycle can move quickly and quietly across station tracks, doesn't leave the same kind of tyre signature as a car, and can access terrain that might be harder for larger vehicles. And electronic devices? Electronic devices are memory. They're timelines. They're location pings and search histories and messages and photos and everything someone might think they deleted but didn't really delete. When police seize devices, they're looking for contradictions between what someone said happened and what the data shows actually happened. The fact that these seizures happened in mid-January and the major crime declaration came 3 weeks later suggests to me that something in that forensic examination moved the needle, whether it was vehicle forensics, whether it was data from those devices, whether it was timeline contradictions, we don't know yet. But you don't escalate to major crime without something solid pushing you there. Oak Park Station is not a suburban street where random cars pass by every 5 minutes and strangers could blend in. Remote pastoral stations are their own ecosystems. They have controlled access. They have gates and tracks and routines. Everyone knows who belongs and who doesn't. Unknown vehicles get noticed. Strangers get questioned. The idea that someone completely unconnected to the property just happened to be there at exactly the right moment to abduct a 4-year-old without leaving any trace, without being seen, without their vehicle being noted, that's statistically almost impossible in a setting like this. So when police say they found no evidence of unknown abduction, part of what they're really saying is the logistics don't support it. The setting doesn't support it. And combined with no evidence of environmental wandering, the case collapses inward. It becomes about the people who were already there, the people who had legitimate access, the people who wouldn't raise suspicion by being present or moving around the property. And this is where I want to invite your thoughts, because this is the conversation the mainstream media tiptoes around. When you've got a remote location, when you've got no evidence of wandering, when you've got no evidence of stranger involvement? And when police are now focusing on people known to the child, what's the most logical conclusion your brain goes to? I'm not asking you to name names. I'm asking you to think about proximity, about access, about who was in that setting when Gus disappeared. Share your thoughts in the comments, but do it smart. Talk about patterns, not people. Talk about scenarios, not accusations. This case is also a really interesting example of how modern investigative technology is changing what's possible in remote policing. The combination of thermal imaging, drone coverage, AI assisted imagery processing, and systematic forensic methodology means investigators can now eliminate possibilities with actual confidence rather than just hope and guesswork. When Detective Superintendent Fielke says they found no evidence supporting the wandering theory after processing 706 square kilometres of aerial imagery with AI assistance and conducting 8 ground searches with hundreds of personnel, that's not a casual statement. That's a conclusion reached after exhaustively testing every reasonable physical explanation. The AI processing is particularly significant because it can identify patterns and anomalies that human reviewers might miss when looking at hundreds of hours of imagery. It can flag areas of disturbed ground, unusual heat signatures, objects that don't belong. It speeds up the triage process and helps investigators focus their limited human attention on the areas most likely to yield results. The fact that even with these capabilities they found nothing consistent with a child wandering into the environment tells you the wandering theory isn't just unlikely. It's been systematically disproven, and this is where I'm going to lean into that energy a little bit, because people have been getting called conspiracy theorists for months just for saying something doesn't add up here. People have been shamed for asking basic questions like, where's the physical evidence? Or, does this timeline actually make sense? And I'm sorry, but asking questions is not disrespect. Noticing patterns is not cruelty. You can have compassion for a family and still acknowledge when a story has holes in it. From day one, there were people saying this case felt fishy, not because they wanted it to be sinister, but because their pattern recognition was working. When you followed enough missing person cases, you learn the difference between tragedy that follows predictable patterns and tragedy that doesn't. A child wandering off in harsh terrain usually leaves certain signs. There's usually a direction that makes sense based on topography and visibility. There's usually some kind of trace within the early search radius. And when those things aren't there, when searches keep coming up empty despite massive effort, experienced observers start asking different questions. Now we're watching South Australia police essentially validate those questions. Not the wild speculation, not the name calling, but the core instinct that said the wandering story doesn't fit the evidence we're seeing. Police have now confirmed there's no evidence of wandering and no evidence of stranger abduction, and they're focusing on people known to Gus. That's exactly where the pattern recognition was pointing months ago. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question before you jump to the comments. In a remote station setting where access is controlled and the circle of people is small, where police have ruled out environmental wandering and ruled out stranger abduction, where are your instincts taking you? What scenario makes the most sense given those constraints? I'm not asking you to accuse anyone. I'm asking you to think through the logic. Because when you strip away all the theories that don't have evidence supporting them, what remains is a very specific set of possibilities. And while police haven't named anyone publicly, and we're not going to either, we can absolutely talk about the categories of scenarios that make sense versus the ones that don't. Think about who had access. Think about who had opportunity. Think about who would know the property well enough to move around it without raising questions. Think about who might have the means to make something disappear in 706 square kilometres of remote country. And think about what it means that police seized a vehicle, a motorcycle, and electronic devices in mid-January and then escalated to major crime 3 weeks later. Detective Superintendent Fielke made it clear that this investigation isn't slowing down. He stated, "I can reassure the community that despite the complex and challenging nature of the investigation, Task Force Horizon will continue to thoroughly and meticulously investigate the disappearance of Gus until we get a resolution. We are all focused and determined to locate Gus and return him to his parents." The language there is careful but telling. Return him to his parents, not reunite a lost child, not rescue a survivor. return him. When you combine that with police conducting searches specifically for remains on February 2nd, and when you combine it with the investigation focusing on suspected death rather than rescue, the reality of where this is heading becomes clear, even if it's heartbreaking. You're likely going to see more targeted searches based on intelligence rather than broad grid searching. The forensic analysis of those seized items will continue and potentially yield more search locations. Investigators will be refining timelines, comparing statements to physical evidence and data, looking for the points where stories don't align with what devices and vehicles can prove. This is moving from search mode to prosecution mode, even if no charges have been filed yet. And here's something else to watch for. Police sometimes go public with developments like this, not just to inform the community, but to apply pressure. To make someone who's been sitting on information realize this is serious and they need to come forward. To make someone who knows something feel the walls closing in. To signal to anyone with dashcam footage or memories of unusual activity that now is the time to speak up through official channels. At the center of all this analysis and all these questions is a 4-year-old boy. Gus should be worrying about what's for afternoon tea and annoying his little brother and watching cartoons. Instead, we're here, months later, with police searching for his remains and investigating his suspected death. That's unbearable. And it's why emotions run so hot on cases like this. But the path to justice isn't emotion. The path to justice is evidence, patience, and discipline. It's investigators doing the methodical work of building a case that can withstand legal scrutiny. It's not about what we think we know. It's about what can be proven. So here's what I want from you in the comments, and this is where this community shines. What's your read on this development? Do you think the major crime escalation was always where this was heading? Or do you think something specific came back from those January forensic examinations that changed everything? When you look at the setting, the lack of evidence for wandering or stranger abduction, and the focus on people known to Gus, where does your logical brain take you? And do you think the key evidence is going to be physical, from the vehicle or motorcycle, or digital, from those seized electronic devices? Keep it smart. Keep it responsible. Talk about scenarios and patterns, not names. But don't be afraid to share what your instincts are telling you, because that's what this community is for. This is a space where you can have real conversations about cases without being told you're terrible for asking questions. And if you want more of this kind of straight talk analysis where we don't pretend uncomfortable questions don't exist, follow and subscribe. Because we're going to keep following this case as facts emerge, and we're going to keep doing what mainstream media won't. Treating you like adults who can handle complex, difficult discussions about tragedy without needing everything sanitized. This case was fishy from the beginning. Now we're watching investigators confirm that instinct piece by piece. The question is, what comes next?